Blah, blah, blah. Test, test, 1, 2, bop, boop, beep, beep, boop, beep, boop.
So I didn't tell you this. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yep. Test, test, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Hang on. I'm just fixing my collar. Okay, go ahead.
I didn't tell you this, but in was it episode 97? I think it was. Like you went like staticky for like 3 minutes, and I could not hear a word you were saying, and I thought it was my internet. And I'm like, come on, fix, because it'd done it once before, where it's like just for a second it glitched a second and then came back, and it kept not. And I was like, oh crap, it's probably my internet. But I unplugged my headphones and put them back in, and it fixed it. And I was like, oh, good.
Yeah. So it wasn't me. So
No, it wasn't you.
Clap.
I need new headphones apparently.
Ready? 3, 3, 2, 1. Oh, Josh is gonna love that. All right.
Episode 95.
Do you remember where you were when you heard Robin Williams died? The whole world was in shock because this seemingly happy, joyful person we all loved and beep, 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 boop.
Don't forget to say episode 95.
We all loved and knew. Anyway, all right. Episode 095. Do you remember where you were when you heard that Robin Williams had died? You know, the whole world was in shock because this seemingly happy, joyful person that we all knew and loved had silently been hurting, and in pain. Thanks. All right. Golly. All right. Episode 095. Do you remember where you were when you heard that Robin Williams had died? It seemed like the whole world was in shock because this man that we just assumed was happy and joyful, and when we loved him, had silently been hurting. It was in deep pain. How many people do you know that might be silently struggling right now? Well, in today's episode, I talk with someone who has dedicated his life to helping those who struggle.
Welcome to the World Changer Show with Matt McWilliams. I'm your host, Mark Sieverkrop, a world changer just like you and Matt. On each show, we're going to bring you an inspiring person or message to help you unleash the world changer inside of you and live with passion, lead with purpose, and leave a legacy. Thanks for joining us today. Now let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to the World Changer Show. This week you're listening to episode 95. And as always, you can find the links to everything that we talk about today, including the unedited video cast of the interview, on the show notes page at mattmcwilliams.com/095. And before we get into the interview, Matt, I just want to let everybody know, if you listen to this interview and you enjoy what Matt and the guests talk about today, pull out your smartphone and text WCS giveaway to 33444. Again, that's WCS giveaway, all one word, to 33444 to be entered to win a free copy of the book that Matt and our guests talk about today. You ready to get started, Matt?
I am, Mark, and I will point out two things. One, you don't have to have a smartphone to do that.
Oh.
And it works.
Whatever phone you have.
Yeah, exactly. We'll talk about that in an episode one day, why I don't have a smartphone. But
we should.
That's write that down. That's a future episode. Well, guys, I just want to say I am super, super stoked about this episode. It's very different. This is a very different topic, a very different subject matter, and a very amazing guest that we were honored, surprised that we were able to actually get as a guest on this show. And I say that in the best possible way, because I know he's so busy with what he's doing. And so I'm stoked to share this interview with you. Like I said, it's a different topic, different subject matter today, but this guy is just amazing, somebody that I look up to, and I'm super excited to share it with you.
Absolutely. So today's guest is the founder of To Write Love on Her Arms, a nonprofit movement dedicated to presenting hope and finding help for people struggling with depression, addiction, self-injury, and thoughts of suicide. To Write Love on Her Arms has one of the largest online audiences of any nonprofit at more than 2.5 million followers. And Jamie, we'll start that over. I should not say Jamie if I'm going to say today's guest. All right. So today's guest is the founder of To Write Love on Her Arms, a nonprofit movement dedicated to presenting hope and finding help for people struggling with depression, addiction, self-injury, and thoughts of suicide. To Write Love on Her Arms has one of the largest online audiences of any nonprofit at more than 2.5 million followers. And our guest has been interviewed by NBC Nightly News, CBS's Sunday Morning, and Rolling Stone magazine, among others. He's also the only non-musician to win an MTVU Woody Award. He speaks frequently, telling the To Write Love on Her Arms story and encouraging audiences at universities, concerts, and music festivals. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy this interview with Jamie Tworkowski.
All right. Well, welcome to the show, Jamie.
Hey, thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, well, I think a good place to start would be to ask. I mean, I'm fascinated by this. Actually, is what is your organization? It's called To Write Love on Her Arms, which of course says nothing about what you actually do. So, tell us a little bit about To Write Love on Her Arms.
Yeah, so it began in 2006 just as an attempt to help a friend who was struggling with depression, drug addiction, self-injury. My friend Renee, she had also attempted suicide. Mm-hmm. And initially it wasn't meant to be a charity or a nonprofit or a movement. It was just an attempt to help her. And it started by telling a little bit of her story. And so To Write Love on Her Arms was actually the name of the story that I wrote back in 2006 after she was denied entry into a local treatment center. And really that story was met with such a surprising response that it gave birth to the organization. And so if you fast forward from then to now, we continue to talk about those issues that she struggled with. Now really on a global scale, there's a whole team of us based in Florida. And more than anything, we communicate. We try to let people know that if they struggle in those ways or those areas, it's okay to be honest. They're not alone. It's okay to ask for help. We get a lot of unique opportunities, whether it's online, on college campuses, music tours and festivals, where we get to go out and invite people into this conversation and into the work we're doing. And we also give directly to treatment and recovery.
Yeah, so I mean, I know it wasn't intentional, and I mean, I've read that story. And I would encourage anybody. I think if you, I haven't checked. Is it actually up on the To Write Love on Her Arms website? Yeah.
Or even if you Google To Aloha story.
Yeah, it's one of those stories like you read it, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know about other people but like, I remember the first time I drove through West Virginia. This is kind of a weird thing. And like, I was about 20 years removed. I grew up, I tell my story, like I grew up, I lived in a trailer park. I had a single mom who, I rarely saw because she was just trying to like keep me alive. And when I first drove through West Virginia, I was like 20 years removed from that phase of life. And I had progressed, you might say, to suburbia and like had a good job and kind of like had made it in life. And I remember driving through West Virginia. We're driving down, I forget what interstate it is, but you're up maybe 1,000 feet above the city below. You're on the side of a mountain. And I remember looking down and I just kind of looked over at my wife and I was like, like people live like that. And I guess I had forgotten that. And I read Renee's story and I'm just like, wow, like it's real. That's not like, this isn't the movies. I mean, I could go like a million different directions. This is probably the hardest interview I've ever done because like, there's so many things I want to talk to you about, but like when you wrote that, what was your intention initially in writing that story? What were you hoping would come out of that? And then, I'll ask the next question after that.
Yeah. I think for starters, I wrote it for myself. And I guess what I mean by that is all of that experience was new for me. And those conversations were new for me. and I didn't want to forget. Like I sometimes give the example of, you know, if you've had the experience of coming home from camp, or maybe as an adult coming home from a really rich vacation, and you don't want to just go back to normal. I felt like I wanted to try to capture some of those conversations and overall like what was moving around in me. And then on a certain level, just wondered if other people could be encouraged by it. But certainly had no idea, you know, that what would come next would come next. So I think in a way, you know, part of it was for me, I wanted to write something that honored her, and then wondering on some scale if other people could be touched or encouraged by it.
Yeah. That's interesting that you wrote it for you. I mean, I get that, because as I'm reading and going into her story, you know, I was drawn in, and like I remember I got to the last, you know, bit of it, because it's not a long story. You know, this is not a novel, or even it's a chapter in your book, but it's a short chapter, as most of the chapters are. But I remember kind of going, I wish there was more to this. You know, like, okay, you know, what happened next? And I wanted like more detail. And I mean, I know you probably kind of felt the same way. You were reminding yourself of that. And I never thought about that, but that's, in a way, I kind of do the same thing. Like, why do I write about roller coasters? Because I don't want to forget about the day I got to spend all day riding roller coasters. You know, it's not necessarily that I'm trying to help anybody. You know, I mean, it's fascinating.
There was, I think, with that, in putting it out there, because it was so vulnerable for her, I think there was certainly the hope that other people could be encouraged. But you know, I wasn't a writer. I didn't write for a blog. It wasn't, you know, going out in a magazine. So there wasn't a platform that would, you know, allow me to think, oh, this is going to be read by thousands of people, you know? So I think even if there was the hope to help people, you know, it's so wild the way it played out, because, you know, I didn't have those things in place to do that, really.
Yeah. So you're touching on these, I mean, like ridiculously serious subjects in that post. We're talking self-injury, suicide, drug addiction. Stop me if I say something that's not true. You know, I mean, the list could probably go on, you know. So you're writing about those serious things, and obviously somehow, and we don't really need to get into that, but somehow it struck a chord with enough people that this thing blew up. It went viral, which is almost a term that I think has lost its meaning today. You know, like, wow, something went viral, like big whoop, you know, well, so do cat memes. Right. So this went viral. It clearly touched, you know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. So what was that next step? Like, how did you go, you know, fill in the blank here? Like, today you're leading this big organization that's doing so much good, and it started with a simple blog post. Like, what was that messy middle? How'd you get here?
I mean, I was working a job as a sales rep for Hurley, a surf brand, a clothing company, and I thought that was going to be my career. And so what happened next was exciting and surprising, but it was also really scary. I felt like I was in over my head. I didn't have the training. You know, I didn't have much that I could offer people who began to ask questions, who began to share really difficult parts of their story. And so as much as it was exciting, you know, to receive these messages and to see these comments, part of it was just overwhelming. And now, if you fast forward, the weight of what we read and people that we hear from, it's shared by a whole team. But back then it was just me. So, you know, that part was overwhelming. And there were a lot of growing pains, especially early on, just trying to figure this thing out. I didn't grow up dreaming of starting a charity or leading one. And we had a unique beginning where we had attention and money coming in before we set out, or I set out to start, you know, something organized. And so it was very different from the usual beginning.
Interesting. I think one of the things I got out of this, out of your story, but you started off by saying this, you were a sales rep. Like, you're probably, I don't know, were you in a cubicle?
No, I was mostly on the road. I was
okay
for the whole state of Florida for Hurley. So essentially driving from surf shop to surf shop, selling clothes.
So, but still, you're a dude traveling to surf shops, and not the, it's not like the linear progression to founder of nonprofit, you know, with suicide prevention and all that. And, you know, but I hear that and it's like, okay, where were you in life? Nowhere special, you know, you weren't a writer, you're self-proclaimed. I'm not a writer, but you wrote. And I think that's a valuable lesson for people. Like, you weren't any of the things that you supposedly should have been to get where you are. but now look where you are, and it's pretty cool. So I commend you. I mean, there could be a spiritual element to it. That's, not necessarily the point of this, but, I commend you for following that path and going where I think obviously you were meant to be, which is really, really cool to see people doing that.
Yeah. And I love to admit, or it feels important to admit, it was really scary. Like it wasn't all, sexy or easy. To make the decision to leave Hurley was really scary. And it wasn't a sure thing. There was no way to know if this would last 6 months or a year. I didn't even know if it could be a job or a career for one person. So as much as it, we're almost 10 years in, and there's a lot to be thankful for and a lot to celebrate, no one really could have known. And so I had good friends, even family, who kind of said, hey, are you sure about this? Because I had the kind of job that you probably don't get a second chance. There's very few jobs like that on the East Coast. And so I literally grew up dreaming about this sort of thing. And it was a scary thing to walk away from that. But I like to tell people to write Love in Arms felt too good, felt too special to walk away from. And I feel like now I get to bring my heart to work. And I think that's part of what you're getting at is I think we want to encourage people to do that, like to do work that you believe in, to live a life that feels meaningful, that feels purposeful.
Yeah. What did you tell, the friends and family that thought you were crazy?
Well, most people were supportive and they were positive, but they also just wanted me to be careful. And,
okay.
MySpace was brand new. Social media was brand new. So there's also this idea of you're kind of rolling the dice on something, certainly my parents had no idea what it was. And, but then there were just as many, even Bob Hurley, who was the founder and is still the CEO at Hurley, who's one of my heroes. He was totally understanding and even encouraging, and to this day is encouraging. He started a brand by taking chances. And so I think it resonated with him. And I'm thankful for those people that said, hey, you got to be sure. This is a big deal.
Well, I mean, there's an element of what you're doing that's very entrepreneurial. It's the same spirit, whether it's a nonprofit or a new business or whatever. It's the same spirit. You're pursuing what you think you're meant to be doing, and there's a point where you got to just like take the leap. As I think Reid Hoffman says, you jump off the cliff and build an airplane on the way down. It's the same kind of thing. Like you said, MySpace. I mean, like you look back and if somebody told you now that MySpace would be what it is, or if they told you then, I should say, okay, MySpace isn't even going to exist in 4 years, would you still have done it? Maybe not,
Oh, yeah.
And so, but I think when there's meaning behind it, and I mean, one of the things I totally get from you and your organization is just the meaning and the passion behind it. When you have those elements, it doesn't matter whether it's MySpace, Facebook, Twitter, or who knows what we're going to have 3 or 4 years from now. You're going to be successful. So,
yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. And it's interesting, to look back. There's so many wild kind of leaps that we had to make and just so many surprising dots that have connected and doors that have opened. And there was no way to know all that, but I'm glad I took the chance and kept going.
Yeah. So let's talk about this, this new book you have out here. I can't reach it. It's right behind me. I was gonna pull it up here, but it's called "If You Feel Too Much," and I'm curious. Like the first question I had when I saw that was like, okay, what does that mean? Because where did that title come from? Yeah,
so that came from something I wrote the night that Robin Williams passed away, which I think it's fair to say that was the night that not only I found out, but basically we all found out about the death of Robin Williams and that his death had been a suicide. And I knew right away I wanted to write something, and I didn't want to write speculating about him, his life, his death, the circumstances. I wanted to write something for people who could relate to that kind of pain, to that kind of struggle, even coming to a place or close to a place of thinking about. And so what I wrote began with those words, "If you feel too much," and really trying to speak directly to people who suddenly were given permission to think about this stuff, to talk about their pain. And so If You Feel Too Much came from what I wrote that night.
How long ago was that? I forget.
That
It
was,
feels like it feels like it was just yesterday, but it feels like it was also
I believe,
forever
it was
ago.
a year in August.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, that was one of those moments, like those defining moments in our lives. I mean, not, yeah, he was a celebrity, but to so many people, he was so much more. Like, a good example is my father-in-law, my wife's dad. He looks a lot like, especially when he was younger, he looks a lot like Robin Williams. Like, he could totally his 30-year-old Doug Embody could pass for 30-year-old Robin Williams if you did a little bit of hair, And so he had this like really kindred connection with him. And I just remember, like, he took it really hard. It was like he'd lost a brother.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was like, I don't know, that was like it was the first time in my life personally that I'd ever been touched, I guess, even though I'd never met Robin Williams, but it was the first time in my life I'd been touched by suicide.
Yeah.
I've thankfully never known anybody, who took their own life. And so it was, it really got me thinking, like, wow, him.
I think we all equated him with joy. He
Exactly.
brought so many people joy, and he seemed to live with joy. We have these memories of him smiling, him laughing, him obviously making people laugh. And I think that's part of what got to us was, whoa, if he can quietly be in this much pain, I wonder how many other people are in that kind of pain.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy, but so you have this book out, and you said earlier, you're like, I wasn't a writer, but you are a writer now. You're actually, a New York Times bestselling author, which has got to be, I don't know if you're like some people who put that in front of their name all the time. It's like and you always got to put the PhD after your name and stuff like that. But I'm curious, just, turning to your writing for a moment, just the creative process. Like, what does your creative process look like, and how has it evolved since 2006?
Yeah, it's funny. It hasn't changed that much. And more than I would like, it kind of hinges on inspiration. So it tends to, I usually joke that lightning has to strike, like something has to happen. A lot of times something negative or difficult, and writing is how I respond. And I admire people who write every morning or write 5 days a week, or, have this structured plan. Certainly deadlines help, when someone says, hey, this is due tomorrow, that's helpful. But for me, it's typically, so much of it has been about that inspiration. That's true for the stuff that shows up in my book. I wrote something earlier, I haven't written a lot. I've been promoting this book and talking about it and reading stories from it, but I haven't been doing a lot of writing. And this morning I woke up, and the Atlanta Hawks had a new marketing campaign that was kind of this parody, meant to be funny video that was based on Ashley Madison. And I just found it really offensive. And so I wrote something, but I couldn't have planned on that. It was just how I felt, and it felt like the right way to respond.
Well, and I think that's important. I mean, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, where do you get your inspiration? And I think the answer I'll answer for you is, like, it could be from anywhere. It could be from a marketing campaign from an NBA a basketball team. That's different than my friend Renee. Those are very different sources of inspiration. And I think that's an important lesson, is that you're open, your eyes, your mind, your heart are open to whatever might inspire you. And you're not hesitant to share what you think about an NBA basketball campaign.
And the interesting thing was, people pitched different ideas, even different book ideas that were a bit formulaic, and that doesn't mean it's wrong, but people said, hey, you wrote Renee's story. What if you shared 10 stories like that? And it doesn't mean that's a bad idea, but it never resonated. It never felt like something I was supposed to do. Another example would be I didn't feel like I was supposed to tell the rest of Renee's story. Like, I felt like I shared a moment in time. We're kind of forever linked because of that. But it didn't feel right. It doesn't mean it's a bad idea, but it didn't feel right to be the author of the rest of her story. So I think, maybe for other people, there's a takeaway there. Like you don't have to say yes to everything. Like I think you have to find what feels true and what resonates with you.
So there's something, I'll admit something, that I somehow missed the news flash that To Write Love in Her Arms actually did get made into a movie. I'd heard, this is a while back, that it was going to be, but your friend Don Miller, Blue Like Jazz took like a decade to get actually made into a movie. And I kind of thought like it was in that same process. And then just today I went to the site just to kind of, read up, and I was like, and the first thing I noticed was it had, what's his name? Rupert Friend?
Rupert Friend, yeah.
Yeah. And I recognize him because my wife is such a big fan of the movie. What was the Jane Austen book?
Pride and Prejudice.
Pride and Prejudice, yeah. And he's Mr. Wickham. And so I can't see him and not go, Mr. Wickham.
Well, he had a great role on Homeland as well.
Yeah. And so I immediately see him and I'm like, that's Mr. Wickham. I have no idea what his actual name is. It's Mr. Wickham, right?
Yeah.
And so it got made into a movie. So okay, first of all, what was that like, that you're part of your story, even though I know it's Renee's story, but it's still your story. You're now like a movie.
Yeah. No, and ours took a while. It didn't take 10 years, but it actually was done for about 4 years, which is a long time.
I didn't know that.
In movie world. And so we didn't know if it would ever come out. There were people, especially in Central Florida, people who were extras in the film, and they had to wait 4 years to see the thing. It was one we never could have imagined. It's a fun thing to sit around and say, hey, who would you want to play you in a movie? And I found that, in the end, we're thankful for it. I'm thankful. I'm happy. But, there's a Jamie character in the film, and that's there's a lot of emotions that come with that. You're going to have opinions about what someone says as you and what they wear and how they say things. And in the end, I'm able to swallow the little things I wish were different because I believe in the overall story. I believe in the overall film. But yeah, it's wild that I actually got to experience that, from being on set and watching it come to life to, seeing the early editions of the film and the editing process. And then finally years later, this finished product that we got to share with people.
It's funny, if somebody didn't know you and they said, if they were to make a movie about your life, who would play you? And you're like, actually, I know the answer to that question. And it's Chad Michael Murray. He actually did.
My sister had a big crush on him growing up. So that's a funny twist in the whole thing.
I just think that's hysterical. Like, actually, somebody's already played me in a Hollywood movie. Anyway, so speaking of that, so you've been in the movies. You've you've spoken on obviously big stages. Tens of thousands, in front of thousands, tens of thousands. I don't know if you've ever spoken in front of 100,000 people, but you hang out with NBA stars. Kyle Korver. Like, who doesn't like Kyle Korver? Pretty good. Celebrities, all that. And by all accounts, at least I think, to the outside world, you have quote unquote made it. So my question for that is how do you keep yourself in check?
Yeah, man, it's interesting. I'm someone who struggles with depression. There's a lot that I'm thankful for. There's a lot that I'm proud of, but at the same time, I'm 35 years old. I live in the town I grew up in. And I think the nature of depression, one part of it is you have the tendency to focus on what's missing and to kind of see life through that lens. So my friends who know me, I think they would say that I don't wake up and kind of, stretch my arms and say, oh, I've made it. I tend to wake up with kind of this restlessness and really aware of things I wish were different. And there was a time, and I'm aware that some of those things are super fun. It's a fun, surprising privilege to be friends with Kyle Korver. But it's not my whole life, and I've really come back. I think years ago I was pretty fascinated as some of those doors started to open, but as the time has gone by, I think I come back to just the value of real relationships. My family, my nephews, my friends that I've known for 20 years. And so that's been, I think, a really healthy kind of full circle journey. And, you know, I have another friend who years ago, he just said, no one should prosper. I forget the exact quote, but basically no one should benefit from the suffering of others. And so I have to remember what this whole thing's about, you know, and it can't be about me being cool or talented. Like, I want to wake up and do a job that invites people to get help and stay alive. For people who feel alone, for people who feel like outsiders, like that has to be the heart of it. And I'm thankful. I feel like I'm able to stay in that place. And the cool thing is you can marry the two, like the people at either end of the spectrum. I had lunch with Jessica Chastain, who's this incredible actress. I had lunch with her in New York a couple weeks ago, and we're sitting there talking about how she can get involved with suicide prevention and how she can support the work we do, and essentially how this very beautiful, famous person can use her influence to help someone who feels alone and feels unnoticed. And so I get excited about some of those kind of contrasting moments, or moments that are filled with contrast.
It's really cool. I mean, I think that's important. You know, like one of the things I was curious about, and you sort of answered that, was like, how do you keep this bigger than yourself?
Yeah.
And I think it is bigger than yourself when, you know, I don't think you have I don't think that's a scoreboard behind you where you're like, yep, saved a life today, check, you know. But it is pretty cool to think that, like, okay, the work that I've been called to do and I'm doing it, we know that lives have been saved, and that's a big freaking deal. I mean, like, lives are being saved.
Well,
I just love it.
The scoreboard thing is interesting, though. It's not a scoreboard, but we meet people that remind us the other end of the spectrum. You know, a mother who lost her son to suicide, families touched by addiction. I posted this open letter to the CEO of my favorite basketball team and have no doubt I'm going to get blasted. You know, I'm going to get lit up by people that don't see it how I see it. You know, so there's hard parts that come with it, but as you pointed out, there's some things we can be really thankful for. That, you know, there's nothing better than someone saying, I'm still alive because of the work you do, and so I hope that's never lost on me.
Yeah, I mean, I hope people get this book and read it. And one of the, at least in my version, I don't know if there's different versions, but in my version, it's on page 44, Flowers to the Sea. Yeah. And you mentioned that, you know, telling, like, you've been on the other side, and the guy's name is Zeke, and you got to, you know, I think it was it 5 years after he had,
that sounds about
died?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And just, like, you know, it was still very, very raw for his mom. And anyway, you know, the point was that, you know, they do this benefit, you know, thing, something I can't remember exactly, but some sort of a surfing thing. And they're doing this benefit, and she's getting to see all this good happening as a result. And you said, you know, this must be a very bittersweet day for you. And she said, every day is bittersweet.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, that really stuck with me. Like, I know, in church recently, our pastor said, we were talking about, I think we were in Proverbs, and, you know, we're talking about, speaking of what you were just talking about with the Atlanta Hawks, we were talking about marital infidelity. And he said, there are two types of, like, you know, as a pastor, I hear a lot of people who are in pain, you know, like, I'm dying of cancer, or I'm this. He said, there are two types of pain that stand out from all the others. A spouse who's been cheated on, and a parent who's lost a child. And it's a very different type of sobbing that comes from them. And, you know, I know that all of us just want to avoid that, but it's interesting that you do get to see both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh, wow, this is a hard plane to land. Like I said, it was a hard plane to take off and a hard plane to land. But as we wrap up, I think one of those questions that was gnawing at me, and maybe I don't know if you have an answer for this or not, but, like, you you often remind people about their story is important. I think you say hope is real, help is real, your story matters, or your story is important. And that's a central theme of To Write Love in Our Arms. So let's say that someone's listening. The theme of the show is changing the world and being able to get your voice out there. And they say, Jamie, I have a voice, I have a story to tell. What would you tell them? Like, what's the first step in sharing your story?
Yeah, I think we don't have a lot of control over whether or not a movie gets made about us. I don't think we have a lot of control over, whether or not we write something and it goes viral, or if we, all these different things that people use to kind of measure success or value. I love to tell people, To Write Love in Our Arms started about as small as something could. We tried to help one person, and I wrote one story, not even knowing where it would go. And I think as people, we're made to tell stories. Not everyone wants to write, but in different ways, we're made to tell stories. We're made to tell our own story, to be known, to be loved. And so I think it can be as simple as, choosing to be intentional about getting coffee with a friend and being honest and telling our story that way. Or maybe it is in the form of writing and you share it in the context of a small group. But I think it's really about being known and the idea that we're made to be known. And I think we get so wrapped up in followers and likes and, book deals and things like that, which are great, which are exciting. But I think the common thread is really this question of you just got to tell your story. And for a lot of people, you can ask the question, is there anyone who really knows you? Is there anyone you can really be honest, people who get to be a character in your story? And we use that example a lot. And so I think I would encourage people to start there. Start with your friends, start with your best friends, start with being intentional, not just about the stuff you're proud of, but about the stuff that hurts, the things you wish were different, things that keep you up at night. We talk a lot about counseling. We believe in counseling as, there's times I need a perspective beyond what my friends can offer. I need advice beyond what my friends can offer. And so when you're really struggling, I mean, sometimes we need more than, to write a blog. we need someone who's going to meet us in that place and ask some really good questions and help us navigate through that.
Man, I'm a big believer in counseling as well. I mean, that's something that has been huge for me. And I was just watching a thing with Rick Warren, and he talked about how when he and his wife Kay were first married and they were about to kill each other, he said, we have a great marriage like 30 some odd years later, but it was because of counseling. And he was like, I made $800 a month as a pastor, and we were spending $100 a week on counseling. Like, I don't know about you, but that's like half. I'm not very good at math, but that's half of his income. Like, and it's half of a small income. Like, oh yeah, we made $1 million a month and we spent 500,000. Like, that'd be different.
Yeah.
But he spent half his income. He's like, he said I should do a MasterCard commercial that's like, saved marriage, priceless.
Yeah.
And he talked about like the idea of like, I can't afford counseling. He said, no, you can't afford not to get it.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important because like, what is your happiness worth? $100 a week? Probably at least, like, I don't know, like add a 0 or 5 to the end. And I mean, it's huge.
That's a great example. And there's so many. I mean, we take our car to an expert, when there's things that we don't know how to fix. If you break a bone, you don't play it off. Like you go to the hospital. If you're sick, you probably go to the doctor. And what if we approached mental health the same way? What if we said, hey, this is really important and I need to talk to an expert?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an advocate of like going into debt. My wife used to work for Dave Ramsey after all, but I think your happiness is probably worth it. And I don't know. I mean, like that's a whole separate subject, but it is so important. Like you said, you don't do your own heart surgery.
Yeah.
And counseling in a way is a form of heart surgery.
Well, man, I think too, sometimes people use that as kind of a scapegoat. I know counselors, professional counselors who will see people for $10.
Yeah.
Like there's people that work on a sliding scale. There's people that offer scholarships. So it can be expensive. Certainly treatment can be very expensive, but it can also be affordable. And there's good people who do this not to make a bunch of money, but because they believe in this work. So we love to encourage people to take that first step and see what's out there.
Most of the counselors I know, especially the good ones, aren't living in big houses. You know, they're not broke, but they're you know, they're not living in big houses either. They're doing this because, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just, you know, like you said, you know, yeah, you could write a blog post or whatever, but, you know, I talk about, like, I don't get nearly as much satisfaction from, I had a post that once, you know, it got thousands of Facebook shares, and I was like, that's really cool. Like, the next day I forgot about that.
Yeah.
But I have a folder in my email that I often go to read, and it's individual emails from people that said, this helped me do this. This meant this. I left my job. You know, I finally stopped working for a crappy boss because of this post. And I'm like, that's the fun stuff. You know, that's the stuff that, like, gets me up in the morning and goes, yeah, like, not like, ooh, 2,000 Facebook shares, you know, woohoo.
Yeah.
What did he do? Like 7 minutes later, that's forgotten.
Yeah.
Oh, that guy changed his life. That's never forgotten. So,
Totally.
yeah. So as we wrap up here, Jamie, you know, one of the things that came to mind, you know, is I read the book, and I, you know, I've followed you for a while, and I'm just been, like, interested in this, and you have so much to say, and I love it all. And, like, you know, you've spoken from stage, you've shared, written, I don't know, how many blog posts have you written?
I don't know.
A lot. We'll just go
Yeah,
with a lot. But let's, like, take all of that. Like, you've got, for some odd reason, like, all that stuff disappears. All your speeches are gone. All your blog posts, like your WordPress database crashes, and you didn't have a backup. You got 3 minutes, and you got to, like, sum up everything that you know, and, like, the message that you want to give to the world in 3 minutes or less. What would it be?
Man, if I had a book, I would read, you know, the piece is called "There Is Still Some Time," and that's where the title of the book came from, "If You Feel Too Much." And that's just a couple pages. So that's what comes to mind. But, you know, to paraphrase, just want people to know they're not alone. Want people to know it's okay to be honest. It's okay to be honest about your struggles, the places you feel stuck, the things that hurt, the things you don't know what to do with. Want people to know they're not alone in those circumstances. Other people have been there. Other people are there. Other people relate. They might not show it at first glance, but other people are carrying things as well. And want people to know it's okay to take a break. It's okay to put a hand up and say, I need to talk to someone. I'm not doing well. I need help. Great help is out there. We've touched on that a second ago. So I think for me, a lot of it comes back to honesty, wanting people to know it's not only okay, but it's important to be honest about your life and your story and the stories that make up your life. And then just to know it's totally okay to ask for help. We've found most people who need help, they don't take the first step. 2 out of 3 people who struggle with depression, they never get help for it. And so I think it points to the stigma and the shame and the confusion that so many people live alone when it comes to their pain, especially, you know, the really intense kind. And we believe that can change. It changes, you know, by what we're doing right now, by talking about it, by saying it's okay to go there. And we've come to see and believe that honesty is contagious. And so I think when I share my story or you do that, it gives other people permission to do the same and to be honest. And so I think that's kind of the message or messages that we want to get across and that I want to be about.
I was going to ask the last question, but I have one more that just came to mind as you talked about that with mental health specifically. Like, do you feel like we've made enough progress, or do we still have a long way to go with, like, the stigmatization of depression?
I mean, I think it's both. You know, I get to see a lot of progress. I get to see a lot of evidence of good. I heard someone say something the other day I thought was brilliant. He basically said that people made the stigma. The stigma, if you think of it as a wall, it was built by people. And the really hopeful thing is maybe people can be the ones to take it down. It's super simple, but I thought it was right on. And like I said, I think it goes away or begins to go away when we just start to talk about it, when we say it's okay to talk about. But with that, certainly there's work to do. You know, I think to the average person, there's still some uncertainty of, hey, can I talk about this stuff? Are you going to judge me? Will I be misunderstood? Will I be sent home? Can I keep my job? So there's certainly still work to be done, but we think it's a conversation that's really encouraging, that's really hopeful, that it doesn't need to be this giant bummer or, you know, heavy, depressing conversation. But for me, it's one I feel privileged to be a part of day after day.
Yeah. I mean, when you say 2 out of 3 people aren't getting help, that was kind of the first thing I thought. I was like, why is that? And I think stigma is probably a big reason for that. And so I just, you know, if anybody's listening and that is something that you struggle with, like Jamie has said, I mean, there's not, people say there's nothing wrong with getting help. No, there's something beautiful about getting help. We just did an interview with Shannon Kaiser. You know, one of the things that she said in her book was basically that if one person goes out and changes their own life, basically one person goes out and finds their joy route and they are happier. You know, she was in that, like, she had a prescription for antidepressants. And she said she stood at the wall of the door of the pharmacy, and it was like an invisible force field said no. And she, you know, she was able to find a different way to overcome that depression. So if one person does that, you've changed the world. And it's true. It's like the butterfly effect. You have changed the world. So Jamie, as we wrap up here, the last question is the one question I ask every guest. And as you can tell, these were not like stock questions that I ask everybody, of course. But the one question I ask everybody is, Jamie, when you look back on your life, kind of that same, like, one of these days, what legacy do you want to leave?
Oh, man. You know, we've talked a lot about stigma and the work that's being done and how much is it. You know, I would love to feel like I was some small part of some of that changing, of people, even a few people coming to believe it's okay to be honest, coming to believe it's okay to ask for help. You know, like I said, I've had the privilege of meeting people who say they're still alive because of the work that we do. So I think that's the dream, is just that would continue, you know? And so if there's a legacy, hopefully it's that. And, you know, beyond that, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm an uncle, I'm a friend, I'm, you know, a couple people's best friend maybe. And I really have come to cherish those things. And, you know, I want to make those people proud. I hope they know that I love them and would love to be thought of as kind. So yeah, some of it's the simple stuff. You know, I have 2 little nephews who I adore, and I want to be around for them, and I want them to know that that I love them, and I feel like it's an absolute joy to be loved by them. So some of it's the really simple stuff. I want to keep telling stories, and I hope those stories can move people, and good can come from it. And yeah, I'm gonna try to just keep it going.
That's awesome. Well, folks, he's the founder of a worldwide movement, and he's the subject of a movie this year, which is really cool, and the author of an amazing new book. Jamie, you are a world changer. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
Wow, Matt, you know, you said it at the beginning, but this is a very, very different episode. But I think it's safe to say it's one that touches the heart of anyone who hears it. What was the biggest thing you took away from the interview?
It's a loaded question. I mean, this was, I'll share the biggest thing, and then I'll come to a couple of other things possibly. I mean, the biggest thing that I took away, like, as far as something that might help me personally, and so selfishly, I guess, is that everybody has a voice. Now, I think we instinctively know that, but what I mean is we all have some amazing story inside of us. All Jamie did was write it. He's not a writer. You know, he worked for a surf company, you know, and he wrote a story, and it became To Write Love in Her Arms. You know, he wrote this story. He just was honest. It was raw. If you read the story, I think it's poetic. It's not literally poetry, but it's poetic. I think it's well written. But I say this in a way that I know Jamie will not take offense to it. There are 100 million people or more who could have written that same story,
right,
about something that happened in their life, but they're not willing to, or they're afraid to. They're ashamed of it. They don't think they can write. Well, neither did Jamie. You know, that's just it. It's not like he wasn't a published author. And so, but he put it out there, and the world got a hold of it, and it was powerful. And I think the other thing is just the importance of being aware of what's going on around us, in the sense of, we let off the episode talking about Robin Williams, and that was a big, thing that he wrote as well about. It's, we all probably know somebody who is going through a very dark time. What separates Jamie from most people, and this is what the story of To Write Love in Her Arms, the genesis of it is, he did something about it. He spent time with the person. He loved a person unconditionally. He literally did what Jesus talked about, loving somebody with that kind of love. And he was there for her, and it eventually became a story, and it became a movement. But it started because he was there, because he was present. And I think it's important to just be aware. I think it's important to open your eyes, open your ears, open your heart to what's going on in the just your immediate circle. I'm not talking about worldwide. I'm not talking about like starting some sort of worldwide thing, but somebody that is suffering. Somebody has, statistically speaking, somebody in the past month has thought about a way to kill themselves. Mm-hmm. That's a deep thing. Like somebody has thought about a way to take their life, to end their life, to like somebody that and love. And there's a reason why and love them. You don't know there's a reason why you love them. There's a reason why you like them. Somebody that you love and like has thought about taking their life. And you think about how we felt about Robin Williams, and you say, well, man, I really liked him. He was funny. I enjoy his movies. I enjoy watching his interviews. And now he's no longer with us. And if you had known him and that was how you felt about him, what would you have done? Like, what would you have done to stop that? And so somebody somebody that brings joy to your life, somebody that makes your life better, is thinking about killing themselves right now. And if you're not open to that, then this world is going to be missing somebody very important. And we're all important. We're all world changers. But what are we going to do for those people around us? And so, yeah, it's definitely being aware of that. And then ultimately sharing your story, sharing your experiences with the world, because you do have a voice.
Well, I think, as you were talking about that, Matt, I couldn't help but think about the interview you did with Todd Henry in episode 91, and how Todd talks about developing your voice. And, I think Jamie's a great example of that, where we all have something we want to say and something that's important to us. And when you find that, it resonates with people. I mean, look at Jamie. It resonates with 2.5 million people, this story that he wrote, because it resonated with him, and he developed and discovered his voice. And, the second thing I thought about is exactly what you said, that, I know people that I'm very close to, very good friends with, and have good relationships with, that struggle with depression and struggle with, anxiety and different things like that. And the biggest challenge is, what do I say? What do I do? And I never know what to do. But, listening to this interview with Jamie and, other experiences I've had, I've learned that all you can do, and the most important thing you can do, is to love them and to be there, and just to be there. And I think that's what I loved about that story that Jamie told originally, is the fact that he was just there. He just cared when nobody else did. And I don't think it's that nobody else did. I think it's that a lot of people don't know what to say or do, so they don't do anything. And they just are quiet about it. They see the person struggling, but they walk by, or they don't say anything because it's like, shoot, I don't know what to say. I have another experience recently where a friend of mine is facing, because of medical issues, facing, the fact that they might not live very much longer. And so many people just don't say anything because they don't know what to say. It's awkward. It's scary. We don't know what to do, but in reality, that person just wants to know that you love them and that you're there for them, and that you'll do anything that they need you to do. And if that's nothing, you'll just sit there, and that's okay too. And I love that that's what Jamie did. And that's what this organization provides for people, is just, letting them know that someone cares, and that they're not alone, and that they don't have to be alone if they don't want to be. And it's so powerful to have that in your life when you're struggling.
Absolutely. This is kind of one of those things, like I have to think about whether I'm comfortable sharing this, but at the same time, I believe, you know, one of the things that people often comment about is just the level of transparency we have. And, you know, I think we look at people who are put together sometimes, who have so much going for them, and yet there's this deep dark part of them. And, you know, there was a time in my life when I kind of felt that way. Like, you know, I had a business that was growing. You know, I wasn't particularly relationally outstanding, but I had a couple of really good friends that I got to hang out with all the time. And financially, I was set. I mean, I finally progressed. I was 3 or 4 years removed from living with my mom, you know, sleeping on her couch and trying to start a business. And I had those trappings of success. But, you know, the thing about life is sometimes life just sucks, you know?
Yeah.
And I had a pastor once, he said, yeah, sometimes the human condition just sucks. The human condition sucks the life out of you. And then the question is, what do you do about it? Ironically, his name was Jamie George. And, you know, when I think about that, I think about this time in my life when I had all of the trappings. Like I said, it looked from the outside looking in, I would imagine it looked like, wow, Matt has the kind of life I want to live.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there were many times where, because of the events of just the day, life sucked so much for a short period of time that I would look out my balcony and think, the third floor balcony, like, I just want to jump off. And I don't mean that in a joking, like, I'm going to jump off the balcony. Like, no, it was like, I contemplate, like they say, talk about contemplating suicide. Like, I had it planned out.
Mm-hmm.
I knew how I would do it. I knew what I would take. I knew how, like, where I would jump. I knew it. Like, there were times where I just, you know, I went through a relationship and a breakup where, I remember driving home one day, and there's a 90-degree curve, right before where I turned into, at the time I was living in an apartment. And I remember thinking, like, what happens if I just, like, I'm close to it. I'm 20 seconds from it. And I remember thinking, I'm going to speed up. And my foot started going down on the pedal, and I started getting faster and faster. And I remember thinking, I'm driving straight, and driving straight was pretty much like certain death. You know, there was no surviving that. And I don't know what happened, but like 5 seconds before I got to that curve, I slowed down and took the curve normal and got home, and that feeling passed for that moment. But, you know, one of the biggest things I got out of this, and if I were to hope people would leave with a message other than, yes, you have a voice, and yes, you need to be there for others, it's that, you know, there is literally no shame in getting help. There is no shame in talking to people about what's going on in your life. You know, whether that be professionally, whether it be a nonprofit, whether it be a friend, like, get the help that you need. What changed me was I started meeting with a counselor, and we processed through these things. And she helped me to get, because for me personally, these moments, these like suicidal thoughts were very fleeting. They were short-lived, less than an hour at a time, and they weren't happening more than once every month or so. But it was just when life sucked to the point where I was like, it's time to just end it. And she helped me, like, taught me what to do in those situations, you know, and I still would have them, but I knew how to process them. I knew what to do. And for me, then it wasn't this deep, dark place where I would go into the depression that lasted for days afterwards. It was, I came out of it. And what I did was different. It will be different for everyone. So I'm not even going to share what I did, like what she taught me. But she taught me how to handle those. And now when I have those thoughts, it's really not that big of a deal. Because I'll admit, I still do sometimes. Like, there are times where I just think, you know, because I mess up. Like, I screw up as a dad, I screw up as a husband, and I say, you know what, the world would be a better place without me. My family's life would be better without me. And again, that thought comes, and as quickly as it comes, I know what to do with it, and it goes away now. I don't dwell on it, and there, you know, but that's serious stuff. And I don't know Robin Williams. Like, I don't know, was he having one of those moments like I had, where life sucked for a moment,
right?
But he acted on it, and that's the difference. Is like, because he didn't get the help that he needed. And if he had just had the help that he needed, the world would still have him, and the world would still have hundreds of thousands or millions of other people that the world really needs.
Right.
They're necessary people. We would have them if they had just gotten the help that they needed. So if you know somebody, encourage them to get the help. Take them to that. That's what Jamie did. They took Renee to get help. Take them to get the help. Don't just say, hey, here's a number. Don't give them a business card. Don't be that cold and callous. Like,
Right.
spend the days with them. If it's a weekend and the counselor's office doesn't open till Monday, you spend every minute with them. Don't let them leave your sight.
Right.
You spend time with them. You take them to the counselor's office. And, if you're that person, then start talking to people and go see a counselor. Show up at a place. There are tons of places. There's no shame in showing up on the doorstep of a nonprofit and just saying, listen, I need help.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the shame in that? Like, I would rather you be alive next week. I would rather you be alive next week and be a little bit embarrassed to show up on somebody's doorstep than be dead.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as simple as that.
Yep. And I think, like you said, the most important thing is realizing that you're not alone. I mean, that there is places to get help and there's people that love you. I mean, I imagine in those situations, you might feel like there isn't, but there is. There always is.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's what I loved about this story. And the quote that I wanted to share this week comes from that original story that Jamie wrote. And it's what Renee says at the end of the story when she's going into rehab, if I remember right. And she says, the stars are always there, but we miss them in the dirt and clouds. We miss them in the storms. Tell them to remember hope. We have hope. And I just love that. I love that, that idea that the stars are always there, and we just miss them with all the stuff that clouds our minds or that we get worn out or stressed out with. Is there anything else, Matt, that you want to touch on with this interview with Jamie before we finish up?
No. Normally I would, but I think we've said it all.
Okay.
I love what Renee writes there. The stars are always there, but we miss them in the dirt and the clouds. We're looking in the wrong places sometimes. They're always there. Like life is, there's so much beauty in life, but what do you see looking down? Well, sometimes you see some cool stuff. Our daughter, Araceli, is really into worms and bugs, but for the most part, looking down, we don't see very much. And if we get focused on the clouds, we get focused on the storms, we miss the beauty that's behind them. So just don't forget that there's beauty behind pain.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked about it before. I said no, and then look at me. Our greatest successes are usually on the other side of our greatest fears. Our greatest joys in life are usually on the other side of our greatest disappointments and depressions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like we're getting close to winter, and when this will air in October, and the leaves are falling, and they're changing colors, and the air is getting crisper. At least for those of us who live north of Mason-Dixon now, it's a different season. And we're a short time away from there being snow on the ground and it just being dark and cloudy. But you know what I'm already thinking about? I'm already thinking about April 1st. I'm already thinking about that time when like the first leaf pops up again and it's green. And I'm thinking about that first day, like that very first day when it breaks 60 degrees and everybody's out and like in their shorts and it's like 61 degrees and we're all out in like shorts and flip-flops in northern Indiana. I'm already thinking about that. It's 6 months away, but I'm already thinking about how cool that is. You don't get that without the cold. You don't get that without the dark. You don't get that without the winter. And so the winters in our lives are nothing more than they make the springs, they make the summers all that much more enjoyable, but you got to get through them. We gotta get through those times. We got to be thinking about those good times that are at the end, that light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
Well, as we wrap up, we would love to give away a copy of Jamie's new book, If You Feel Too Much. And this is the book that Jamie sat down and wrote when he heard about Robin Williams passing away. And if you would like to enter to win a free copy of it, text WCS giveaway to 33444. Again, that's WCS giveaway, all one word, to 33444 for your chance to win a free copy of Jamie's book, If You Feel Too Much, Thoughts on Things Found and lost and hoped for. And now the question for this week. Hold on. I went too far. There we go.
That was awkward.
And now the question for this week is, how will you tell your story? Head on over to mattmcwilliams.com/095 to answer that question.
You want to start? I've made some changes just based on how this was going. So
I was dropping past it, and then you deleted it, and
yeah.
it went way
And
further.
now this week's question, and then I head over to answer that question until next week, and I think we're good. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I was scrolling down, and then you deleted it, and so it like went up way farther, and I was like, oh, now I don't know where I'm at. Okay. And now for the question this week, how will you tell your story? Head on over to mattmcwilliams.com/095 to answer that question. Until next week, remember, you were born to change the world. You were born to make history. You were born to have hope and give others hope as well. So believe it, become it, and pass it on.